Hello, everybody! Welcome to Discovery Day Online from the Alf Museum. I am Gabriel Santos, Collections Manager and Outreach Coordinator of the Alf Museum, and today is a very special event, our Path of the Paleontologist. This one is for all you junior scientists out there who dream of becoming a paleontologist and unlocking the secrets of the past. Today, we've got four really great special panels for all of you to learn about four different job classes within the world of paleontology, from curator to collections manager, preparator, and even student. Right now, we are in our Path of the Curator panel. Research is the name of the game when it comes to a curator. Might you be interested in discovering the stories of the past? Well, this might be for you. Today, I'm very, very excited to welcome four amazing paleontologists and good friends of mine who are here to share advice, share stories, and answer your questions about what it's like to be in curation as a paleontologist. So why don't we introduce everybody? Dr. Farke, why don't we start with you?
All right. Hi, everyone. My name's Andy Farke. I am the Augustin Family Curator and Director of Research and Collections at the Raymond Alf Museum of Paleontology, which, for those of you looking at the faces on the screen, I get to work with Gabe at the Alf Museum. I'm originally from South Dakota. I've been interested in paleontology for a long, long time. Did my undergrad work at South Dakota School of Mines and Geology, PhD in anatomy out at Stony Brook University, and I've been at the Alf Museum now since 2008. So it's been a really great time, and I'm really looking forward to the panel today.
Thank you, Dr. Farke. I am very, very excited that Dr. Farke is our curator. He's an amazing curator. I'm a little bit biased, but I'm really excited to see what he can share with everybody today. Next up, we have Rebecca Hunt Foster.
Hi, everybody. My name is Rebecca Hunt Foster, and I am the paleontologist and museum curator at Dinosaur National Monument. And I, like Andy, have been interested in paleontology for a long time. I grew up in Oklahoma and Arkansas and did my undergrad at University of Arkansas and my master's degree at Texas Tech University. So I'm excited to be here with you guys today. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Rebecca. Next up, we have Dr. Joshua Bonde.
Good morning, everybody, from wherever you're tuning in around the world. Thank you guys for having me today. So again, my name is Josh. I grew up in Northern Nevada. I got my bachelor's at the University of Nevada, Reno. I did my master's at Montana State University in Bozeman, and then did my PhD back here in Nevada. I've worn a couple different hats as a paleontologist. So I used to be a university professor. I've been a curator for a local museum, but now I'm the director of research for the Nevada Science Center. And I'm happy to share some of my experiences with you this morning.
Thanks so much for joining us today, Josh. And last but certainly not least, my paleo sister, Crystal Cortez. Welcome, Crystal.
Hello, everyone. I am the curator of Earth Sciences at the San Bernardino County Museum, not too far from where you guys are at the Alf Museum. I got my bachelor's from Cal State Fullerton in geology, and I have a master's from Cal State Fullerton as well in environmental studies. I also have worn many different hats in paleontology, which is always fun, but I got my start at the Alf Museum working with Andy back when he was just a baby curator. So it's great to work with all of you guys again, so I hope that I can share some good insight.
Thanks so much, Crystal. Go Titans. All right. Well, I really like that you said that you wear many hats, and I think that's a very common thread amongst paleontologists, especially if you're a curator. Well, why don't we start off the panel with defining what exactly a curator is? Anybody want to kind of give a go at that?
I guess I could start because I'm a little bit on the outskirts of what a curator is. And a curator is actually defined by your institution, because many different institutions have like the word curator can mean many different things. I know that in some larger institutions, it's extremely based on only research, but in smaller institutions, we gotta put on all the different hats because there's no one else that's around that can do it. So for me, a curator is definitely someone who does research. But I don't do research in the sense that I publish a lot. I do research in the sense that I have this giant collection, we have over 2-3 million objects, and I need to learn everything about them. I need to know what has been written about them, what hasn't been written about them. So that way I can actually talk to other researchers and be like, hey, you want to come study this because this hasn't been studied, or this is a really funky bone. I'm not sure what's going on here. Can I talk to people about it? So even though I don't publish research in the same sense as someone like Andy might publish research, I definitely am still doing a lot of research and going through all these papers all the time. So that's what curation means at my museum, at least.
Thanks, Crystal. Anyone else?
I can chime in on that. So, Crystal, that was a great definition of a curator. I know in my experience, again, curation is definitely a moving target of a definition depending on where you're at. There's big museums where, like Crystal said, curators are actually kind of parallel to academics. Like if you were at a university type system where there's actually tiers of curators, and you're expected to write grants and you're expected to produce so much research in peer-reviewed journals and things like that. In my former post and my current post, the curatorial role is more like what Crystal said, where it's a small staff. So not only are you trying to do research on the items, you're also researching how to properly take care of those items. So you might have some random item in your collection, and you're just like, how do I take care of this thing? So you have to do research on just actually what it takes to just make sure this thing doesn't fall apart on you, because you're taking care of that collection. The way I like to explain to people, like a curator, is you're taking care of something that's in your care. It's in your care on behalf of everybody for perpetuity, and so don't screw it up. But that's kind of how we approach it. And your collections manager, your registrar, you're taking care of things and you're getting research done. So it's kind of a jack of all trades in the way that I approach curating, especially at my current post.
Thanks, Josh.
Yeah, I guess
Rebecca.
I approach it from a similar side as kind of like Crystal and Josh do, because we here at Dinosaur, I am the only official paleontologist at the park and the only person dealing with museum issues. I'm lucky enough to have a collections assistant right now. But a lot of times, yeah, like Crystal said, you're trying to research all this information, you're trying to better understand it. And sometimes networking really plays into that too. I need to know who might have a specimen if I can't find it, or who would be the best people to reach out to, who would know people that could work on something. So that plays a lot into it as well. And sometimes it almost feels like you're a librarian for all of these cool fossils and keeping up with everything, from the publications and the people to the actual material itself. So it's definitely a very multifaceted job.
Yeah, I think that's so true for me too. I mean, in my position, I do a little bit of teaching. I do my own research. I have students who I work with on on research topics. I do outreach events like this, helping out with the rest of our staff. Every day is a little bit different. Coordinating field work, kind of whatever the day needs and whatever the museum needs at the moment, and it's a lot of fun. But I think, particularly, and I think this is true of everyone, is you got to do a lot of sort of teamwork to make it happen. It's like I do some of the collection stuff, but I also really just I'm not doing always the writing the labels on, but I might be working with the person who's writing the labels on to see what's going to be our priority for the next thing, and then helping out with identifications and that. So yeah, every day's different.
Thanks, everybody.
And,
go ahead, Crystal.
Sorry, to piggyback off of what Andy was saying, I mean, it's so crucial for us to okay, let me start over again, rewind. When I always get volunteers, I always like to do the job with them, even if it's just writing down a label, just so that they can kind of get the feel for what they're actually doing. And then it also kind of gives you practice as well, because sometimes, it's been I mean, I haven't made glue for about a year now. So sometimes I have to like get in there and actually like make the glue and go through the process. Because yes, I can research all about what the process is to take care of these fossils, but if I'm not doing it on a daily basis, I forget, you know? And kind of going back on what Josh said too, is that you have to research what happens to these fossils. I remember the first time I got a fossil with grayscale, is what I call it, but pyrite rot. You know, I was like, what is this? What do I do? And again, kind of what Rebecca said, that networking, which is I just reached out to a bunch of people and I was like, what do I do? How can I preserve this fossil? I had a really nice fossil. I didn't want it to get ruined, but it had this grayscale on it, or it had this pyrite rot on it. And it was like, what do I do? How do I fix it? So, yeah, all really great information, everybody.
I really liked what Rebecca said also about, you know, like if you have a fossil in your collection, finding the person or, you know, who would know on who could work on it. And that's like, sometimes that's the most fun part of the job. Like on the one hand, like you're always like, oh, I gotta be the one to work on these. I'm the curator, it should be me. But then you're like, oh, I only have so many hours in the day. And then it is so fun to find someone that just completely explodes with geekness when they see a fossil. Or even better, you show them something that's like, I don't know what this is. And then they explode with geekness and it's like, oh, okay, this is way cooler than I thought. So a lot of it is just helping people connect with the collection.
Thanks, everybody. Those are really great definitions of what curator does. Again, many hats for a lot of folks. But let's kind of rewind a little bit. Why don't we talk, each of you share kind of your story of how you ended up as a curator. Is this something that you always wanted to do when you got into paleontology? Dr. Farke, why don't we start with you? Because I think your story is a little bit fun, especially because I know it.
Yeah. So when I was little, you know, and interested in paleontology, I thought like, yeah, that's like what a paleontologist does. That's like the main paleontology job because that's what, you know, you'd see on, you know, in books and stuff like that. And so I, you know, off to college and that, and then I realized like a lot of different ways to be involved in paleontology. And then I realized, oh, there's not always necessarily a lot of jobs in paleontology, even if there's lots of different ways to interface with it. And so I switched gears a little bit for my graduate work. My PhD training is in anatomical sciences, so human anatomy, as well as dinosaur anatomy and animal anatomy. And my goal there was like, okay, it seems like a really good line of employment, and actually one that I absolutely loved being involved with was teaching human anatomy for medical schools. So that was all a good chunk of my graduate training. I actually loved it. And as I was getting finished with my PhD, I was applying for all sorts of different jobs, mostly anatomy jobs though, because I was passionate about teaching anatomy and it was fun. But then this job at the Alf Museum popped up and I was like, oh, this is a little bit different. It's a museum that turns out to be a museum on a high school campus, and you have lots of involvement with high school students. And that got me really interested because I kind of rewound my head back to the time when I had been a high school student. And I was like, oh, wow, like this is a chance to mentor people in paleontology in a way that's a little different from, teaching in a medical school or maybe being at a curator at a large museum or something like that. So it's just kind of by, really by a narrow, twisting career path and just kind of having the right job open up at the right time that I ended up as a curator today. Because if you had asked me, 15 years ago if I would be a museum curator, I would say, no, probably not. I'm going to be an anatomist. And I would have been happy, that way too.
Thanks, Andy. And also, for those of you who might not know, Dr. Farke is soon to be the incoming director of the Alf Museum. So, yeah, go, Dr. Farke.
I'm departing the ranks of curator, only partially.
We'll have a separate panel for directors next year. We'll do that one.
Oh, please don't.
Rebecca, what's your story?
Yeah, I always, I didn't get into paleontology till a little later in life. Like I was in my preteens and teens when I started liking it. And I really was drawn to kind of the field aspect of it. I loved being outside and looking at specimens and finding things. And that really kind of piqued my interest. So when I went to my undergrad, I knew I wanted to do paleontology. And when I went to grad school, I was interested in jobs that would be more field-based and would be, actually handling things, because that's kind of the way my brain functions and I learn. And but I wasn't really sure what my career path would be. And I kind of first got into it by doing preparation. I started off as a preparator at Augustana College right after grad school and loved that. It was so much fun, and I learned so much about different specimens and just the whole process of preparing fossils. I find really relaxing and enjoyable. So I really enjoyed doing that for some time before I moved on to a job where I was doing field coordination, so coordinating field work for people and doing collections management, which I really enjoyed. And that kind of like showed me that I really wanted to do more museum-based stuff. I wanted to focus on that, and I really enjoyed collections management. And I, from there, went to a job where I started working for the Bureau of Land Management, which kind of dovetailed nicely into that, because I was working with researchers and with fossils that were coming from public lands. And so a lot of these things were stuff that were in the museum. So it was nice to be kind of on that other side of it. And I've always been kind of a national park junkie and love our public lands and everything they represent. So it was a really nice kind of segue to merge the two. And then when the job at Dinosaur happened to open up, it was kind of the perfect merger of getting to work both on public lands and in museum collections as well. So that was definitely one of the perks for me, was knowing that I would get to work with museum collections again, because I definitely missed that aspect of my job. So now I get to kind of have the best of both worlds. I get to work with these wonderful fossil resources on public land and work in museum collections and with, in situ fossils still. So that's a lot of fun for me.
Awesome story, Rebecca. Thank you. Dr. Bonde, how about you?
So my story is, growing up, I was kind of the dinosaur dork that never really outgrew it. And I think my path to being a curator was inevitable, because I started volunteering at my local county museum when I was in high school. Like, I would go down there and I would help the registrar and help the collections manager. They had no fossils. It was all historical stuff, but I still enjoyed going down there after school every day and just getting in the museum and doing that. For my co-panelists, I'm sure it was probably the same when you guys were coming through the ranks too, but when I was coming up, there was really only two career paths that were available coming up. It was like you had to get a PhD or a graduate degree, and you were going to be a professor or a curator, and those were the only two options. The field's come a long way since then. There's a lot more options if you want to be a paleontologist now. Like, you can be a consulting paleontologist and all that, but at the time, those were the two options. And so when I started college, I was kind of bent on being a professor. So I went and got my PhD, and I was a professor for a while, and I really enjoyed mentoring young people, and I really enjoyed teaching. And at the same time I was doing all that, I was a research associate for our state museum here in Nevada. I was on a board of directors for a natural history museum here in Las Vegas. And so I never really stepped away from the museum world. And I learned that I really hated grading. And so the museum world just kind of called me back, and that's kind of what set me on my path to getting back into the museum world and taking care of things and doing research. And I still get to mentor people coming through the museum ranks, and I still get to mentor young people who are interested in paleontology. So I didn't lose that aspect that I was afraid I was going to lose. And I get to play with fossils all day long, and I don't have to grade. So that's how I got to where I'm at.
I would agree, grading sucks. That's why I like informal education, so I'm in the same boat with you. Crystal, what's your story?
Well, you kind of know my story, Gabe. But for everyone else, I kind of like jotted down some notes. Sorry, that's what I'm looking down at. So, in high school, I was always really, 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 really bad at math. And so I was extremely scared. I knew I always wanted to be a paleontologist, but I was terrified of having to go through college and going through the motions and having to take all of the really scary math that I thought was scary. So if anybody out there is scared of that, I just wanted to give you the encouragement and be like, it's okay. You're gonna get through it. It's usually only 1 or 2 semesters. Just drink lots of coffee. But so my career path is I went to high school and then I wanted to be a paleontologist, and then I kind of like left it. I came back during college. And then that's when I reached out to Andy when he was a baby paleontologist, and I started volunteering there. And then that's kind of what kind of set the ball rolling. I then went to school and I met Gabe and I met Dr. Jim Parham, and he really kind of guided me through the whole process. And he's like, hey, let's just what do you want to do? And I'm like, I really want to work in museums. I kind of always knew that I wanted to work in museums. I just didn't know what aspect. So I was a volunteer. I did collections management. I was paid to be a preparator for a while. And I'm like you, Rebecca, I love preparing. It's just so nice to just sit there and just take the matrix off the bone. It's really, really nice. But I also love collections. I found out that I just really loved working with collections. I love solving problems. I think that's one of the best aspects of the job, is just being able to solve all these different problems where it's like, oh, I only have this tiny little piece of paper and it's got 3 numbers on it. And then I have to like try to scour the entire museum and find those 3 numbers again. And then I'm like, okay, well, what do these 3 numbers mean? And so, because with all institutions, institutional knowledge does get lost throughout the years. So it's kind of up to you as a curator to kind of rebuild that knowledge that your predecessors had. And some people, I know that at LA, the person that was there for 30, 40 years. So they have 30, 40 years of knowledge that you don't have. And so how do you regain that? And that's just kind of going back and piecing everything back together. And that was kind of my career path, is I just really loved puzzles, and I love being able to piece information back together. And I get a kick out of it. That's that's the funnest part. And
definitely a lot of puzzles.
Yes, definitely. And I kind of wanted to stress too, just like from what everybody's saying, it's never a straight path, right? Like I took 4 years off of school between high school and college. And then I took 2 years off between my undergrad and grad. And like Andy, where it was like, oh, there's not a lot of paleontology jobs. I better set myself up for something else. And that's why I have my master's in environmental, because I was like, well, there is a lot of environmental jobs, but there's not a lot of paleo jobs. And this job at the San Bernardino County Museum just happened to open up at the perfect time for me. So I was like, yay, I get to still be in museums. But I'm realistic, and I know that that's not the same. It's not the same for everybody. So I would say don't get discouraged.
Thanks, Crystal. I think that comes back to another question that I was thinking about. Like, when we think of jobs in paleontology, you said there's not just a single path. That's the kind of the point of today, is to share that there are many paths to be working in paleontology. But I think another thing we want to talk a little bit about is kind of like be realistic about what kind of jobs to consider in paleontology, and also consider a livelihood, right? Like, sometimes when you work in paleontology, the pay, very realistically, is not the same you're going to get as a doctor. Does anybody want to talk a little bit about like facing that reality for some folks coming into the field?
So one thing that just kind of like blows my mind, and I realized I thought about the statistic a couple of years ago, is like, it is easy. There are more openings like for quarterbacks in the NFL draft every year than there are for like museum dinosaur paleontology curators, which is like, I mean, it makes me feel really good, because it's like, oh, I'm in a more elite class than, like the NFL players. But I think it is, it is something to like keep in mind. And I think that's where flexibility and all of that comes in. And what I really just tell everyone is like, you train for the career you want, and you work towards that, but just really like, you got to keep your options open. And you really have to make some choices. One of the choices I made when I was coming out of grad school was, I was looking at colleagues that had like certain kinds of curator jobs, and I could see that they were supremely unhappy with their life. They were just stressed, and it's like, I don't want that. I don't want that kind of position. I don't want to have to like, I mean, yes, I do. I still, have to think about grant funding and stuff like that, and all this. But I intentionally, chose a sort of position where there'll still be stress, but it's a stress at a level I'm okay dealing with, and that's part of why there's other career paths I didn't take. Is like I made a choice. I made some compromises in going to the position I did in terms of it closed some opportunities and that, but it also just realistically for my family situation, my wife, my spouse is a PhD in physics, college professor and all that. And like, I had to go to an area where like we could both conceivably have jobs. And so that was another thing in the calculus. So yeah, it's a lot of just like kind of really thinking about what you want in life. Because there is, like I love paleontology, but for me, like there's also life outside of paleontology, and there's things I want to do outside of paleontology. So that was the other factor. And, so I made some choices that like there's other things I'd love to do in paleo. I'm not going to do them because aspects of like getting to see my kids on a regular basis is important for me.
Yeah, I'd say I had a similar experience where I always knew, you don't go into paleontology to become rich, that's for sure. You go into it because you love it. And I've had, multiple times in my life where I've had to drive very far for a job. Like I had a job where I had to drive 100 miles one way every day just to get to work while my daughter was very young. My husband's also a paleontologist, so it can be a really hard juggle sometimes for us to both be able to have a career in the same town, let alone in the same state. So we've had to be apart occasionally to be able to make things work. And now that my kids are both younger and older, I mean, they're not as young as like Crystal's kids, but they're still very young, and I want to be around to be with them and to spend time with them. And so having a job where I can still have my family time, but still be able to do the things that I love to do and do the work that I love to do really is handy. And especially, it's really important for us to all be together. And I feel very, very, very lucky to be both in the position that I'm at, but also to have a spouse that's very flexible with his career choices as well. And the yin and the yang of it, being able to trade off. So it's definitely something to consider. And like Crystal said, the path is never straight. There's so many different twists and turns you can take. And I really think that it's good to become a more diverse person and paleontologist and experience different things. It's okay to do, be a preparator. It's okay to teach on, at a community college level or, at a high school level, any level you can get. Teaching is a really important skill to learn. And I think that it's really important that anytime an opportunity presents itself, it may not be the opportunity you were expecting, but it's still really important to go ahead and take that chance because you're probably going to learn a lot from it and probably more than you expected. So I think it's just being open to all the different experiences that you can have.
Thanks for well said.
Yeah, definitely.
Josh, Crystal? Oh.
Sorry. But yeah, definitely. I think you just have to kind of like outweigh what is important to you. You'd really need to like figure out what's important to you and what you really want in your career and in your life outside of your career, because it's true. There is a life outside of your career that you still need to maintain. A lot of the reason why I stayed local was because I had a baby. And so I wanted to have that support from my family, my immediate family that helps me, take care of the kids. I mean, my husband right now is taking care of the kids, you know what I mean? So it's really important. It was really important for me to try and stay as local as possible because family was just really important to me, and I wanted to be near my family. My mom had been battling cancer, and so I was like, no, there's no way. I have to stay. I have to stay close. So that was probably the most important thing for me.
I would say in terms of making a livelihood in paleontology, I think the biggest aspect I think that everyone's touched on is that you got to be flexible. You can make a career in paleontology if you want a career in paleontology. I think that was a lesson I wasn't taught coming through the ranks. Like I mentioned before, like when I was coming up, there was those two paths, and you had to be in those two paths. Um, Now you can make a career however you want, and then like everyone else has already touched upon, it depends upon your personal situation. If you have kids or a spouse that you need to be aware of or take into consideration. My personal decision to stay in Nevada, even though there's not a lot of universities in Nevada, there's not a whole lot of museums in Nevada, is my tribe is from Nevada, and it's kind of instilled in us that if you go off and get an education, like you need to come back and give back. And so what I've kind of done with my fiance is that we've built our own opportunity. And so we started our own research center, our own science center that goes around the entire state, and we do virtual programming. I think, not to toot my own horn, but the point I'm trying to make is that sometimes you have to make your own opportunities too.
Absolutely. And again, congratulations for the Science Nevada Center. Make sure you check that out online. We have all the links on everybody's institution in the description below, but please follow and support the Nevada Science Center. Those were all really great answers, everybody. So kind of moving forward now, let's talk a little bit about fossils, right? I think that's the question a lot of people are interested in when you're working in curation. I think one of the first things that I want to kind of have everyone talk about is like there's maybe some perception or misconception for a lot of people that when you're a curator, when you work in a museum and you go collect fossils, that you can just go out and the museum owns those fossils and they keep them behind the scenes, right? The public is just like, why don't we get to see them? But that's not the truth. I know that. We all know that. But anybody kind of want to share like how that interaction works with fossils, public lands, private lands, and the public?
Well, as somebody who works on public lands, I guess I'll kind of grab that one real quick, as, although we all have done work on public lands. Yeah, I think people have that misconception that scientists or paleontologists come out in the field and they collect things and then they take them home to their secret stash and nobody gets to see them. And that may have been the way it was at some point, or maybe the way it is in some other places, but that's not really the way it works these days. We try to make specimens available for everyone. As curators, I feel like our role is more of like caretakers for the objects, and that it's really, really important for us to not hoard specimens and not to hoard research, that we need to like work both interdisciplinary and work with other colleagues and try again to put that network out and that net out to try to bring in people who need the work or who are interested in certain topics. So I think that that's a really important aspect, and keeping in mind too that when we collect fossils on public lands, those belong to the public. They don't belong to me. They don't belong to any specific researcher in any museum. They don't belong to that museum. Fossils are kept and held in the public trust by these museums. So they're caretakers. They're hopefully, providing, perpetual care for these objects. And we all really work hard to rotate things out onto exhibit for people to be able to see, to make specimens more digitized so that they're more readily available for people all over the world, and to connect those dots. And so I think that that's a really important aspect of being a curator, especially when working with fossils from public lands, is just making sure that those are available to anyone and everyone, while also keeping them safe and protected at the same time. So it's a juggle, but it's definitely possible.
Yeah, Rebecca, I really love that you brought up digitizing because I mean, that has probably been my biggest push and my biggest effort has been to digitize as much things as possible. We work with iDigBio or all those different things. And so it really helps to actually put it out there. And also research, right? You mentioned, Gabe, early that research is the name of the game, and it really, really is. So all of these fossils that we have behind the scenes and like kept in secret, most of the time it's because we don't know much about them. So we need to be able to tell that story. And the way that we tell that story is by doing research. And it's by reaching out to different colleagues and stuff that actually know whatever specimen it is. There's no way that you can know what everything is. You can't know absolutely everything. Most of you guys know me. My specialty is working with sharks. And most of my collection, I would say 90% of the collection that I work with at the San Bernardino County Museum is all terrestrial mammals. So it's completely different from what my research interests are. So I really need to get out there and really do all the heavy lifting and all the legwork as to like what researchers can actually come in and do that research on those specimens so that we can show them to the public, so that we can put them out there for people to understand. But yeah.
I guess I'll chime in here too, is that, yeah, it's not that museums are hoarding away specimens. It's oftentimes that either there's not enough, museums are only a finite space, and so there's only so many stories you can tell. So it's kind of that trade-off between intriguing stories that are going to, I mean, museums have to make money too. So the intriguing stories that are going to bring people in the door, and the research interest of some of our specimens. A lot of the most scientifically significant specimens are not visually appealing. And so you might have a really cool story and a really cool fossil, but if to the average museum guest, it's a rock. And so, so you have to weigh those in the museum business. So it's kind of interesting that way. We work with the virtual curation lab out of Virginia Commonwealth University, and we're working on 3D scanning lots of specimens and publicly hosting those on like a Sketchfab account, so that maybe some of the stuff that doesn't typically get to go on display because either it's fragile, it's otherwise uninteresting to people that don't study that, can at least digitally visit some of our specimens. But I guess that's my take on it.
Yeah, I think something I always think about is, and a common question I get is like, oh, if you have, like you already have like 40 horse totems, why do you need another 40? Why do you need to collect another 40? Why can't you just like give them away to other museums or put them in the gift shop or whatever? I mean, some of the laws around where we're collecting our fossils from under permit, aside, there's I think real strength in numbers. What Josh was saying about sometimes it's the ugly fossils that are the most scientifically interesting ones. A great example, several of my student collaborators just published a paper that was looking at patterns of preservation in fossil horse toe bones from the Barstow Formation, all collected on permit on land management land. And it turned out that because we had hundreds of these horse toe bones that had been collected over the decades, they could do some really cool science on it. And so having basically being, I guess, horse toe bone hoarders, meant that we could do some science with them that was really exciting, that we couldn't have done if we just said, okay, we got 5 horse toe bones, that's enough, for our collection. And so it's really about, not necessarily about what are we doing, right now for the exhibits or education or the research, but it's like, what might be useful down the road, because I think museums are, lifeboats, to the future of research and education and to the public interest. We don't always know that a specimen that was collected 70 years ago that might look insignificant, like all of a sudden the right person gets their eyeballs on it and it's like, oh my, this is a new species. And so, I think there's real value in having all that stuff, and we get it all gets out there in one way or another, at some point. So, and I think most people I know are really excited about, in the museum business, are really excited about making fossils as accessible as possible within the resources that we have. So that's a way of saying, like, support your local museum, support, your local fossil care centers, because we need any help we can get so we can bring the cool fossils out to all of you.
Definitely. There's a lot of really cool places out there for those who are watching today on how to see some of these fossils that have been digitized. There's things like Morphosource. There's a lot on Sketchfab. A lot of museums have their own personal stuff online. There's even fossil communities like myfossil.org, Fossil Project. So many great resources out there for you to see these fossils and to also know that we're not hoarding them. While we're on the topic of misconceptions, before I get on that, I just want to remind everyone watching at home, we're going to have a Q&A with all the panelists after this last kind of discussion point. So if you have questions, type them in the chat and we'll do our best to answer them all. So last discussion point before we get to the Q&A, while we're talking about misconceptions, I think for a lot of folks out there, when they they love paleontology, they look inward to the field, and some folks just sometimes are scared. They feel like they might not belong for many different reasons. For a long time, paleontology has been very white male dominated. There have been, people are scared of research. There are mental health issues, for, the representation of women in science. There are so many reasons why people might not or might be afraid or scared to enter the field because they don't feel they belong or represented. For all of you here today, do you see the field changing, and what would you say to somebody who feels that way?
I'll start. I definitely see the field changing, even from when I very first started, which was like 12 years ago, maybe. And it's just everybody is really inclusive now, I feel. I have been very fortunate. I have yet to encounter a bad paleontologist, knock on wood, but I feel like all paleontologists are super open and they're very lively. And I have always been a very awkward person. And I feel like paleontologists just kind of like embraced me. They're like, oh, it's okay. Come here. We're all kind of a little bit awkward and strange and weird. We're dirt people. We're looking at dirt all the time. We're looking at dead things. I mean, so if you are afraid that you're not going to fit in, if you like dirt and you like dead things, I'm sure that you're going to be absolutely fine. And also, mentorship is awesome. Andy was a great mentor for me. And actually, Rebecca, I reached out to Rebecca when I first got pregnant because I was like, how do you do it? How do you balance, a career in paleontology and a family life? So I'm always very appreciative of different mentors.
I guess I'll chime in. That was great, Crystal. I remember when I first went to my very first Society of Vertebrate Paleontology conference. I won't say how many decades ago. I think Andy and Rebecca were there. But I also remember being one of the only brown people at the meeting. And I would say, just like Crystal has observed, that over the decades of going to professional conferences and interacting with colleagues, that the field has become more diverse, both gender-wise, ethnically. I would say it's definitely moving away from the traditional idea of Indiana Jones going out in the desert, and I don't know why you carry a whip, it's stupid, but it's becoming, there's people that are able to do paleontology from a computer. There's people that are able to do paleontology from a museum collection. There's people that are still going out in the field and digging up stuff, and everybody looks different now. And I think that's a great step forward in this field.
Yeah, to echo what Josh and Crystal have said, absolutely, because I remember too my first few meetings of the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology where I met Andy and Josh very early on, and I think the field's definitely changing. I remember there not being very many anyway, people of color, women. It felt always a little overly dominated, and that's changing. I can definitely see a change that has occurred, and I also think that that goes along with that. There's also been a change in that we're willing to have hard discussions. We're willing to talk about things. We're embracing the way that everybody functions a little different. Everybody does things a little different, and I feel like we're embracing that a lot more than we ever have. And we're having a lot of these hard discussions. We're trying to make strides forward. We're trying to make change and see change happen, and better our field. And I have to give credit to a lot of our colleagues who work in the background to really make this change happen and try to make things better. And it doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. But I think that it's definitely getting so much better than what it was. And I really enjoy that. So I think that there is that when you think about the field and how it's changed over the last, even just 10 years. I feel like it's taken huge leaps just even in the last 10 years. And it's so great to see all these conversations happening. And we have a long way to go. We're nowhere near where we need to be, but it's getting so much better. And I think as long as we keep having these conversations and we keep working together as a group and accept people and be more understanding and more embracing of everybody's differences, I think things are going to continue to get better.
Yeah, and I think for me, because I'm in many ways kind of what people traditionally think of when they see a paleontologist, other than the beard. I don't have a beard. But, I think a lot of it is like I've just known like my own attitudes have changed over what I saw as I see other people, as I have hard conversations, frankly, sometimes if I'm kind of called to the carpet for something over the years. And I think, we're all, especially those of us that match kind of the more traditional picture of paleontology, just trying to have those conversations and be better, better allies, better, at welcoming other people into the field. Other attitudes I had about like, oh, what kind of GPA do you need to be a paleontologist? Like I'm embarrassed by my old attitudes on things like that. And frankly, I think it's good that many of those things are changing. But yeah, as Rebecca said, like, oh, there's so much change we need yet, but it's happening.
Awesome. Thanks everybody so much. And I mean, GPA stuff, I had a 2.67 GPA graduating, so if I can go, everyone can go for it. It's fine. But also, really quick, I want to send a shout out and thanks to everybody on the panel right here who have all done a lot to, help the next generation of paleontologists as well. I remember, meeting Rebecca at one of my first SVPs, and Rebecca's done a lot of great work for the diversity sessions at SVP. Even me personally, I felt very much welcomed and helped me to stay. So, meeting people like Josh, Crystal as my paleo sister, it just feels so much different. Even from my first SVP, which was SVP Raleigh. I don't know how many years ago that was, but yeah. So, there is a lot of change. And so thank you to all of you. And there are a lot of also great projects to check out online. One thing I definitely would love to recommend is the Bearded Lady Project. That's an amazing documentary that talks about representation of women within the field of paleontology. So check that out if you can, and we'll link it below. So now it is time for questions from our audience. Just to remind everybody, you can type it in the chat. We'll try our best to answer them. And really quick, I know a lot of you might be very excited to ask some paleontologists some science questions, but just remember, we are here today to talk about what it's like to be a curator. So let's try to keep our questions kind of focused on the job. We'll do more questions later if we have time for some cool dinosaur facts and stuff like that. All right, so our very first question today is from Jared McGowan, who is asking, this is a question for any curator. How much of your own museum's collections have you been able to go through, describe, and catalog versus how much you still have to go through and still have coming in? As a collections person, this is a question for sure.
When I started at the Alf Museum, I actually spent like a week just going through and opening up drawers. So I guess I've set my eyes on everything in there, but I just like got to go back through because I've forgotten a lot of it. There's some stuff like as I've got more info, like I know, but yeah, there's so much that I haven't really touched, and we're a fairly small museum in that way. But that's part of the fun of it.
Yeah, we recently moved our entire collections, and so that has facilitated now 3 complete museum inventories that I have done over the course of 3 years nearly. It was a necessary thing. It had to happen. And I've learned so much from doing that because I'm in charge of not just the fossil collections, but our biology collections, our herbarium collections, our archaeology collections, things that are outside of my comfort zone. And I've learned so much by going through all of those specimens, and we still have a ton of work to do and a ton of organization to do. But I feel like that's a really good thing, is to go through your collections and put hands and eyes on things and learn about what you have, because that'll also help you to better facilitate, learn what you might need who you might need to bring in, what the conditions of things are, where you are, and what you need to be doing. And there's never any shortage of work to be done. There's so much to do. But yeah, I think putting those eyes and hands on all those specimens is super important.
Yeah, I just recently, well, not recently, but I discovered that we actually had a whole offsite storage. So I did go through the entire storage that's there in my first week or two, but I haven't gone through all of the offsite storage stuff. I'm doing piecemeal, like Rebecca. I'm in charge of the Earth Science collection, so that includes paleontology, which I'm really comfortable with, working with paleontological specimens, but it also includes all of our minerals, which I'm not as comfortable with, so it's taking me a little bit longer to do because I'm having to go through and like do a bunch of research on those minerals and see what kind of special care the minerals need, because the minerals is a whole different beast and they need a whole different types of care. So yeah, but I love doing inventories. Inventories are my favorite, but that goes back to like what Andy was saying, how like I just like to sit down with my volunteers, with my interns, and just actually work through the projects that I give them, because that allows me to put my eyes on all of the specimens. So
I would say I've seen this problem from two angles. And so where I'm currently at the Science Center, I curate all the fossils that we bring in and all the rocks and minerals that we bring in, but then they get reposited at the Nevada State Museum in Carson City. And so shout out to their collections manager, Rachel, because she always has a heart attack when I come pulling up with a truck full of specimens that she has to put input into their collections. So from that regard, like I'm the problem, I guess. But from the other perspective, as an undergrad, I worked for 3 years at the Mineral Museum at the University of Nevada. And one of my annual duties was doing the inventory. And so going through this historical museum drawer by drawer, comparing old tags to an Excel sheet who knows who screwed up in the past year, and just trying to make sure everything's there. So, and going to a historical museum, there's other issues. Like I used to come across, there would just be like open mason jars of mercury and things like that. And just, you never know what you're going to find in museum collections sometimes.
Very, very true. And really quick, a shout out to our collections folks, our keepers of bones. If you really are interested in learning about what it takes to be a collections manager, tune in at our other panel at 2 p.m. Pacific time as we meet collections manager and get all this inside scoop on what it's like to be in a collections and what it's like to work with a curator. I'm just kidding. Next question for everybody. This one's from Jurassic Ash. I've talked to the curators at my local museum, but I always love to hear others' thoughts. Do you feel computer literacy or tech classes during college are useful for curating?
yes. Absolutely. I honestly, so I took a GIS course because my master's is in environmental studies, and so we kind of do the very broad strokes of things. And it has been so helpful. So one of the first things that I did was digitize all of my localities and all of my paperwork. So again, that institutional knowledge, I don't want to lose that. Papers can get lost. They fly underneath something, and then that information's lost forever. So my very first task was to digitize and get copies of every single piece of paper that we had in a museum, which if you've ever gone through the paperwork at a museum, I feel like it's almost double what you actually get in the collection. So you have to be really good with paperwork as well. But yes, absolutely, 100%. Excel sheets become your best friend. Going from an Excel sheet to a GIS program, all of that is going to help you a lot when it comes to museums, especially when you're digitizing specimens as well.
Excel. Definitely learn Excel.
Definitely learn Excel. I use Excel almost every single day, from everything from collections work to budget work, because I have to manage my own budgets as well, and so it's good to know that stuff. I always recommend that everybody take a GIS class, because if you're going to work with maps at all, or if you are ever going to go outside or deal with anybody's data, you need to know how to use GIS. I think it's a really important, at least take one class. And then museum curation software. So if you're going to be doing any database work, keep in mind that nobody uses the same. Like, it seems like hardly anybody is consistent with the type of databases they use. So you need to be able to be versatile and to teach yourself, usually on the fly, how to use the museum database that you're going to be utilizing, because there's not usually very many trainings available and nobody around to show you how to do it often. So you kind of have to just learn how to use those programs and which buttons to push and what different symbols mean and all that. So I think technology is really important and a good thing to learn as much of as you can.
Sweet.
Go
ahead, Josh.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'll agree that definitely learning computer software is important for all the reasons that Crystal and Rebecca just said. For GIS, definitely that I would say that's I would say that would actually set you up for success at this point now for any job coming up. I would say I'm kind of professionally hamstrung in that I don't know GIS, so I'm reliant on other people to do it for me, and you don't want to be in that position, especially with the people I work with. But another one is that doing the 3D modeling of specimens now requires learning lots of software and just learning that process as well. And then just to echo again, database management, regardless of the program, is vital, especially if you want to be a curator or collections manager.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We have a ton of really great questions in the chat right now, so we're going to try to get through as many of them as we can. So this one is from Grace, who's asking, what is the best way to find job opportunities in the field? Would you recommend reaching out to curators, professors, preparators whose research job we find interesting?
Yes, I mean, that's part of it. And there is the whole paleo career path, is, as we've kind of talked about. I think there's things that I don't like about it, in terms of, like, sometimes, like, to get in, like, you have to, like, it's a lot easier if you've live close to a museum and have been able to volunteer, for instance. That's having that kind of experience. I think getting experience in any way you can, preferably in a paid position if you can, is good. And yeah, it kind of takes experience to boot, to boot that kind of stuff up. I think, making contact of people, even if they can't help you out immediately, they might know someone who can, or they might know of, oh, we have this summer position coming up. We need someone to help catalog this collection. It's a 3-month position, but we need to hire them tomorrow. And oh, look, you're here. That kind of stuff sometimes happens in the field. So yeah, just making contacts, I think, is a really great first step. But also, like, recognizing, like, you got to do some of that legwork to really make it happen.
Anyone else? One more?
I would say be visible. I learned the hard way, or maybe not the hard way. It's more about who you know than what you know. So get out there and get to know people and be personable and get to know them. Let them know that you're somebody that they want to work with.
Yeah. Let's see. Our next question is from Michael Partham, who's asking, what kind of fossils or specimens require the most care and attention?
I'd say historic specimens fall into that category. Specimens that are maybe preservationally challenged, like Crystal mentioned, like pyrite disease or things like that need better care and attention. We have a lot of specimens at Dinosaur that are slightly radioactive to pretty radioactive, so that can bring on some issues as well. So yeah, I would say those usually fall into that category, and very small, delicate things, because you have to have people who are confident in carrying and holding things and who aren't afraid of static electricity or dropping something, because we have a lot of tiny microfossils, and it can be scary to hand somebody a tiny vial with one little tiny tooth in it and worry about, oh my God, are they going to drop this? Because if they do, are we going to be able to find that one little tooth? So yeah.
Awesome. Let's see. This question is from Alson Avando. What is the best school for paleontology in the world?
Whichever school you go to. But Crystal, go ahead. I see you're unmuted too.
That was literally going to be exactly what I was going to say. Whichever school you go to, it's up to you what you make of it, honestly. Wherever you end up going, it's going to be your experiences and how much effort you're actually willing to put forward, because you're going to have to volunteer, you're going to have to do your own research, So it's going to be whatever school you end up going to, but it's going to be up to you to make it happen.
Yeah. Next question. Sorry, I was distracted by this question. This one might be a little bit of a touchy point for some of us to discuss, but we'll discuss it. This one's from username IceSpoon, who's asking, what are your thoughts about buying fossils, auctions, and that kind of world? Nobody want to touch that?
I'll let someone else touch that one.
I'd say it's really important to have data with specimens. You need to be able to collect scientific data in the field and know where things come from and know their context in order to preserve some of the scientific viability for these specimens. So I'd say that's a very important thing that you need when collecting fossils.
I would say this is a very double-edged sword. There's some really important scientific specimens that have come from the private realm via auction. There are private collectors who legally collect fossils off of private property, and they're scientists. They collect the proper data with the specimens, and I mean, at the end of the day, they make a profit on their work, and the public gets the benefit of the science that they've collected. But then the other side of that sword is that there are people who are out to make a buck that are not scientists, and they're more on the treasure hunter side of things. Again, they might have pretty specimens, but unless you're collecting that proper contextual data from the specimens, we lose a lot of science from the way that some of those folks do what they do. So again, we get science benefits from a lot from what some of these people do, but the science is also hurt by some people that are not as respectful to the resource.
Anyone else? No? All right, cool. It is kind of one of those topics. Another thing I want to say is a great resource for learning about kind of that intersection between public and private paleontology is, again, the Fossil Project. Check it out on myfossil.org, and there's a lot of resources on there. So if you're interested in fossil collecting, but ethical fossil collecting, and how to connect with scientists if you have your own private fossil collection, it's a changing world, and a lot of that stuff is very much part of that new world in which we all intersect with each other in the realms of paleontology. I also forgot to say for the question about a school in paleontology, tune in at 12 o'clock Pacific time for our Path of the Student panel. We're going to sit down with current students in paleontology and ask them about what it's like to be a student, their path to get there, and kind of give advice on how to survive that world, because it can be kind of stressful, as Crystal and I remember very recently. Next question is from Logan Morris, who's asking, so I have some experience in vertebrate and invert internships. Ugh, my plant's in the way, sorry. I'm at a crossroad for my next step of grad school. What trends do you see in the field for funding, employment, and availability?
I would say if you really have to take a look at what your priorities are. If your priority is just to get a job in the field, this is what I used to tell students when I was in the academic world, is unless you want to be a professor or a curator, there's no reason to go on to get a PhD. Your most employable degree in paleontology is probably a master's. At that, you can do consulting work, make a decent wage doing paleo consulting. You can get a museum job. You can even get some academic positions with a master's. So I would take a look at what your priorities are. if you're willing to spend the 2 to 3 years to get a master's, if you can afford that, and just look at what the hot topics are right now. You can go to the National Science Foundation website and see who's getting funded right now and see what some of the hot subjects are. It should be something you're passionate about, because if you're not passionate about it, you're going to be really miserable studying it.
All right, next question. This one is from Off Trail Dino, who's asking, what are some of your most interesting interdisciplinary work as a museum curator?
I definitely enjoyed having botanists come through and look at some plants that we have, and learning about how that kind of ties into our regional geology, with some plants growing on certain soil types or certain slope aspects and things like that. That's something I never really had thought about. So that was a really interesting thing to learn with our herbarium collection. And then I've really enjoyed getting to work with some archaeologists who take the time to show me what they're seeing in their specimens, whereas I may see, oh, this is a piece of quartzite. They're pointing out things on the quartzite that are more important to them and their work. And so I feel like I'm learning a lot from my interdisciplinary colleagues by taking time to learn about their research and what they do and how that can tie in to what I do as well, or new and innovative ways that I can do my job.
Yeah, some of my favorite interdisciplinary stuff is going even outside the realm of science, working with artists and other creators, because I learn so much about my science from collaborating, having those collaborations. We've been really fortunate to have some science illustration interns at the museum that work on projects with us as part of their program. And it is so much fun to first think up with them the concept of the project. It's like I have my scientific idea, and then someone who has not just artistic skill, but artistic knowledge and experience, who really just can massage something that was in my brain unformed into something even better than what I had expected. And they're asking, like, if we're doing an environmental reconstruction, they're going to ask me, like, oh, what plant should we have? What like colors the water here? What's the mud look like on the edge? And it's like, it gets me thinking about all these things I wasn't necessarily thinking about. And it makes me better as a scientist, because I'm looking at all the different angles, and it makes the science that much more fun, because then it's so much easier to communicate to my colleagues, to the public, to everyone, when you have this great visual with it. So I would say, like, artistic interdisciplinary collaborations are some of my very favorite.
Well said, Andy. I'm gonna put you on the spot really quick one more time, Andy, because as you're a curator as well at the Alf Museum. But for those of you who don't know, the Alf Museum is located on the Webb School's campus, which is a high school. And for you, you are also a teacher. So what is that like for you? Because you probably never thought you'd be teaching high school students. But as a curator teaching high school students, what's that experience like for you?
Yeah, it's different than I thought it was, than I thought it would be. It's fun, because, I mean, my philosophy going in is my job is not to make them into paleontologists. Like, some students go into geology or earth sciences, or they want to be paleontologists. Most of them don't. They're interested in paleontology. And so I'm really excited by the opportunity to work with students who, even if they go into, say, business or law or public service or politics or whatever, or medicine, and there are people out there in the world who know how a museum functions and what paleontology is and how science works, and then can advocate for those things in their lives. And so I like that aspect of it. The other thing is, really helping students to see the sides of the field that aren't necessarily what they think about. Like, they might think about, oh yeah, we're going to memorize the time periods. And like, oh yeah, knowing the time periods of the geological time scale is important. But then it's like, okay, let's talk about the professional ethics of collecting a fossil. Like, what do I need to do if I'm going to pick up a fossil off the ground? What do I need to know? What implications do I need to think about? What's the history of paleontology within the context of things like colonialism and changes in governments and all this stuff. And really, it challenges me, because I can look into all these topics, and also it challenges the students, and it's a lot of fun to just journey together through these topics that show that being a scientist is more than just like punching some numbers in a calculator and writing a scientific paper. And so I really like that aspect too. And so that's, I think another very interdisciplinary aspect to paleo and being a curator. So yeah, I love that, all those things. It's great.
Thanks,
So
Andy.
if I
Go ahead,
could,
Crystal.
Gabe, can I just jump in really fast? Andy, you brought up such a great point about government. I never knew how much laws you needed to know as a paleontologist, as a curator, especially because you are protecting all of these different fossils. So you need to know what laws apply to all of these different things, how you're collecting, what you're collecting, how you are keeping these specimens. So government becomes such a crucial point in your career, and that's something that was completely unexpected, especially when I went into paleontology. So great point, Andy.
Yeah, definitely a great point. Make sure, like I said, if you are interested in going out collecting fossils on your own, make sure you're doing it ethically. Make sure you're following the law. There are great resources out there on how to do that. You can check out your National Park Service website. You can make sure you're reading any laws online. You can ask a museum. A lot of times they'll have it, or even just reach out online. Because a lot of paleontologists are on Twitter, on Instagram now, and we like to help out when we can. Speaking of which, unfortunately, we have reached the end of our panel today. There were a lot of really great questions in the chat that we weren't able to get to. I'm very sorry. But if you want to, again, try reaching out online on Twitter, ask your questions. Even if we don't answer them, maybe some other paleontologists would be happy to answer them. There are quite a lot of us on Instagram and Twitter. So to end the show, I think let's go around and I'm going to ask everyone, what is the one piece of advice you'd give to somebody who specifically would like to work as a curator? We'll start with Andy.
I'm going to make it two pieces of advice. One is being flexible, and then the second is be collaborative. And I would say I'm going to make that my one piece of advice, because day to day, like, I'm working with our other collection staff, I'm working with educators, I'm working with our fossil preparator, and it's so much about like just setting my ego aside for a minute and realizing that, like, oh yeah, this other person's the expert on this, and we're gonna find a solution to this, but I gotta like step back and let the expert do do this. Like, I can do some fossil preparation, but I'm not a fossil preparator, and there are times where I'm just like, okay, I gotta trust this other person and not micromanage them, and like let them do their thing, and like everyone's gonna be so much happier. So being able to really collaborate and work with others, at your own institution or even like across institutions, I think having those skills, and having that that ability, like I said, to put your ego aside. And I can't do everything all the time, so it's really about opening up and working with other people. Those are, those kinds of teamwork skills are really important to have.
Great advice. Thanks, Andy. Rebecca, what advice would you like to offer?
Yeah, Andy hit it on the mark. Being collaborative, I think, is so important. That was definitely kind of where I was going to, as well as I think just being kind. Be kind to people, be nice to people, and know that everybody's going through different situations, and just be understanding and be accepting of people, and just be nice. I mean, it goes a long way, and we all need a little bit of that in our life, and it can really help. And I think it plays into like what Andy said as well. They go well together. Be collaborative and try to work well with people, even if they're difficult, because they may be going through things that you are completely unaware of.
Very true. Thanks, Rebecca. And Josh, what about you?
Advice I would give, kind of like Andy, I'll steal 2 points. The first would be get experience. Go volunteer, especially if you're in high school or that level, go volunteer at your local museum. There's always projects we need help with, and it might seem menial, but you're getting your foot in the door and something to put on your resume. The second point is something I like to harp on is get mentors. People that will foster your career. I had the benefit of our state archaeologist / paleontologist Gina Torrey as a mentor who helped me through the museum and still helps me through my museum career. So find somebody that cares about you and cares about advancing your career.
Yes, mentorship is very, very important. I've been lucky to have some great mentors through this. Crystal, your advice.
My piece of advice is to not be afraid to say, I don't know. I think it held me back from so much saying, not being able to say that to, like Andy said, setting your ego aside and being like, someone else might know this better than I know this. And also, you can research it yourself, you know? So just don't be afraid to say, I don't know. No one is expecting you to know absolutely everything. It's impossible to know absolutely everything. So don't harp yourself because you don't know one thing.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for the wonderful advice. And thank you all so much for joining us today on Path of the Paleontologist. It's been awesome getting to talk with all of you, seeing all of you, because it's been a while since I've seen some of you. And thank you so much to all of our audience today for joining us on this first panel of Path of the Paleontologist. Make sure you tune in at 12 o'clock Pacific time as we start our Path of the Student panel. And we have 2 other panels after that. Make sure you like and subscribe to our channel to not miss any of these awesome things. And we'll see you soon. Thanks, everybody.